All right, fifth grade Bible. We're going to jump into our next biblical character of the Old Testament. We're going to be looking at Esther. Now, I got my big Bible for this one because there's a lot about Esther that is really interesting. So Esther's one of the books of the Bible, I think one of the only books of the Bible that does not mention God in it whatsoever. Kind of interesting, right? How there's a book in our Bible that doesn't mention anything about God. But if we think about it, this is actually a chess game going on between God and Satan, how they can use kings and queens and nobles and just obedient people in order to bring about a resolution to a conflict. If it wasn't for Esther, man, the Jews would have been wiped out. So even though there's no direct reference to God, God's work can be seen throughout this entire book. So this was written sometime, the story of Esther happened sometime around 480 BC, okay? This was a long time ago, and King Xerxes was in charge. Now, King Xerxes, he was someone who thought that was his Greek name. He considered himself to be like a god. And so he was very, very prideful, and he always wanted what he said to be done. Now, in the story of Esther, we have several main characters. We have the king, we have Mordecai, we have Esther, and we have Haman. Now, Haman, who was basically like second in command in this area, in this time period to the king, he had a huge grudge against the Jews. See, way back before this time period, King Saul was supposed to wipe out all the Amalekites. Now, the Amalekites, that was like Goliath's people, I believe. But he didn't do that. He disobeyed what God had ordered him to do, and he didn't do that. Now, ultimately, Samuel, we all remember who Samuel is in relation to King Saul. Samuel finally carried out what God had commanded, and the king at that time was Agag. I know, right? Agag. And Samuel basically slaughtered him and his people and wiped him out. Now, Haman, follow me now. Haman was a part of the lineage of Agag. Okay? Now, this happened about 550 years before the story of Esther. Okay, so that's where we start. So we're going to start in chapter 1, okay? And this is kind of going to give the backstory, a little bit more understanding of the character of Xerxes, and also set up the scene for what is to happen for the rest of this book. Okay, so chapter 1, if you want to follow along with me, we're going to be doing Esther chapter 1, and it's called The King's Banquet. This is the first part. So now in the days of Xerxes, the Xerxes who reigned from India to Ethiopia. That was a huge range from Asia to Africa, okay? 127 provinces in those days when King Xerxes sat on his royal throne in Susa, which was the capital, in the 3rd year of his reign. He gave a feast for all his officials and his servants. The army of Persia and Media, and the nobles and governors of the princes of the provinces were before him. So he basically was like, guys, we're going to party, and I'm inviting everyone from all of my kingdoms who are like of nobility to come and have this feast. So while he showed the riches of his royal glory and the splendor of his greatness for many days, 180 days in fact. Imagine that, he invited all these people for 180 days just so he could show them how much money he had. When these days were completed, after 180 days, the king gave for all the people present in Susa, which was the citadel, both great and small, so every single person in that capital, rich, poor, noble, peasant, doesn't matter, everyone, he gave a feast lasting for 7 days in the court of the garden of the king's palace. There were white cotton curtains and violet hangings fastened with cords of fine linen, and purple to silver rods and marble pillars, and also couches of gold and silver on a mosaic pavement of marble, mother of pearl, and precious stones. Talk about someone who had a lot of money, okay? So he gave this party to everyone, and they could come and like enjoy everything he owned. Drinks were served in golden cups, and every cup was a different kind. And the royal wine was lavished according to the bounty of the king, and drinking was according to this edict. There is no compulsion, meaning have as much as you want. Don't hold back, right? YOLO. That's kind of, he was the first one to pronounce that, right? For the king had given orders to all the staff of his palace to do as each man desired. That doesn't seem very good, does it? He's basically telling everyone, whatever you want to do, I don't care what that looks like, you go for it. That doesn't seem very good at all. Now, Queen Vashti also gave a feast for the women in the palace that belonged to King Xerxes. So Vashti was the queen. That was his wife, okay? On the 7th day, so remember they had this feast for 7 days. On the 7th day, when the heart of the king was merry with wine, he commanded several of his servants who served in the presence of the king to bring Queen Vashti before the king with her royal crown in order to show the peoples and the princes her beauty, for she was lovely to look at. So here's what's happening. Big party, and King Xerxes is like, you know what? After the 7 days of partying, he's like, I'm going to show you my beautiful wife. Because at this time, they didn't party together. The wives, all the women were in one area, and all the men were in the other area. So he said to his servants, go tell my wife to put on her best outfit, put the crown. Remember, he would like to show off all of his money and splendor. And he said, tell her I want her to come here so I can show everyone her beauty. Now, as a woman, girls, I'd be offended. Boys, don't ever do that. But here's what Queen Vashti did. Queen Vashti refused to come at the king's command delivered by the eunuchs. Those were his servants. She refused to do it. And at this time, the king became enraged, and his anger burned within him. Reacting out of anger will never lead to good things. He reacted out in anger. The king said to the wise men, who knew the times? For this was the king's procedure toward all who were versed in law and judgment, the men next to him being his servants, who saw the king's face all the time. Basically like his cabinet, like his inner, like his closest friends, his closest confidants, okay? He says, according to the law, what is to be done to Queen Vashti, because she has not performed the command of King Xerxes delivered by my slaves? Then one of them said in the presence of the king and his officials, not only against the king has Queen Vashti done wrong, but also against all the officials and all the peoples who are in all the provinces of King Xerxes. For the queen's behavior will be made known to all women, causing them to look at their husbands with contempt, since they will say, well, King Xerxes commanded Queen Vashti to be brought before him, and she did not come. This very day, the noble women of Persia and Media who have heard of the queen's behavior will say to all the king's officials, and there will be contempt and wrath and plenty. So their justification was, well, if the women of this town find out what Queen Vashti did, that she did not command what the king said, all these women are going to rebel and say no to their husbands. So here's what they say. If it pleases the king, let a royal order go out from him, and let it be written among the laws of the Persians and the Medes, so that it may not be repealed, that Vashti is never again to come before the King Xerxes. And let the king give her a royal position to another who is better than she. So basically said, kick her out of the palace, and let's find you another wife. So when the decree was made by the king, is proclaimed throughout all the kingdom, for it is vast, that all women will give honor to their husbands, high and low alike, meaning all women, okay? Doesn't matter if your husband is the poorest of the poor, the richest of the rich, you will give honor to them. This advice pleased the king and the princes, and the king did as Memucan proposed, which was his servant. He sent letters to all the royal provinces, remember all 127 of them, to every province in its own script, and to every people in its own language, that every man be master in his own household and speak according to the language of his people. Now, before you boys are like, yeah, that's right, us men, you got to honor us. We look forward to what Jesus said in the New Testament about how men and women in marriage were supposed to treat each other. Men were supposed to treat women with the utmost respect. And everything back in what King Xerxes was doing was completely against what Jesus' message was when he came. Jesus spoke specifically to women. He was a revolutionary of that time because most of the time women didn't have many rights until, oh goodness, maybe like 50, 60 years ago to have the rights that we have now. King Xerxes was trying to put women bottom of the bottom. Queen Vashti stood up for herself and said, no, you won't do that to me. And she got the boot. So now that's the setup, okay? So now when we look at chapter 2, we're going to see how Esther comes into this picture. Because remember now, Queen Vashti has been kicked out, and they're going to look for a new wife for King Xerxes. We'll see ya on Tuesday.